Settle yourself comfortably. There is no rush here, no sudden turns. Only a slow walk backward through time. Imagine the world growing dimmer, quieter, heavier with stone and candle smoke. The modern sounds fade away, replaced by the soft echo of footsteps on cold floors, the distant toll of a bell, the faint rustle of wool against skin. Tonight, we step into a medieval monastery, not as a powerful abbot, not as a visiting noble, but as a novice, young, uncertain, and mostly invisible. This is not a story of miracles or glory. It is a story of routine, of repetition, of days that blur into one another until time itself feels padded and soft around the edges. As you listen, let the details drift past you gently. You don't need to remember names or dates. Just follow the rhythm of their lives. Slow, measured, unchanging. Unchanging. And so, before the sun rises, before warmth reaches the stone walls, your day begins. You wake up before the sun, not because your body is ready, but because the bell tells you it is time. The sound is dull, heavy, and unavoidable. It rolls through the stone corridors like slow thunder, pressing itself into your half-dreaming mind. You open your eyes in the dark. The ceiling above you is low and shadowed. The air feels damp, like it has been trapped here overnight. Your breath fogs faintly. Even indoors, you sleep on a narrow wooden bed. A thin mattress stuffed with straw rests beneath you. It smelled faintly of dust, old grass, and other bodies that have rested here before. There is no curtain, no wall between you and the others. Around you, shapes begin to stir. Robes rustle softly. Someone coughs once, then stills again. You sit up. Your feet touch the stone floor, and the cold moves up your legs immediately. It is sharp, direct, and familiar. You do not speak. No one does. You pull on your habit, the same coarse wool garment you wore yesterday. It scratches against your skin, especially at the neck and wrists. You have learned not to adjust it too much. Comfort is not the point. As you stand, you feel the quiet ache in your back and shoulders. Yesterday's labor has not fully faded. It never quite does. You join the slow line moving toward the chapel. The rhythm of their lives has already begun. The chapel doors open with a soft groan. Inside, the air is colder than the dormitory. Stone walls hold the night tightly, unwilling to let warmth stay. A few candles burn at the front. Their light does not reach the corners. You take your place among the others. Standing. Waiting. The prayer begins without introduction. Voices rise, together. Low. Measured. Latin words flow past you like water. You know them by sound now, even if meaning sometimes slips away. You stand. You kneel. You stand again. The stone beneath your knees is hard and unforgiving. After a while, the discomfort fades into a dull pressure. Sleep pulls gently at your thoughts. You let it. No one here is meant to be fully awake. The chanting continues. The rhythm does not change. It never rushes. It never pauses for emphasis. This is prayer, as enduring. By the time it ends, the sky outside has barely begun to lighten. A faint gray presses against the high windows. There is no return to bed. The day has started. Breakfast is simple. Too simple to feel like a meal. You receive a small piece of bread. It is dense, slightly stale, and dry against your tongue. There may be a bowl of thin broth, mostly water, faintly flavored with vegetables. You eat slowly, not because you are savoring it, but because you are listening. Someone reads aloud while you chew. Scripture, spoken in a steady voice, without drama. You are not meant to look up. Your eyes stay lowered. Your movements remain quiet. Hunger does not leave after eating. It simply becomes quieter. You learn to carry it with you. It sharpens your senses at first. Later, it becomes a dull companion, always present, rarely acknowledged. This is not punishment. It is discipline. After the meal, tasks are assigned, not through discussion, not through preference. You are told where to go. Today, it is the well. You carry wooden buckets, their handles smooth from years of use. The rope creaks softly as you lower it into the dark. Water splashes below. You pull the bucket up slowly, feeling the strain in your arms. The water is cold. It spills onto your hands, numbing your fingers. You walk carefully across the courtyard, trying not to slip. The stones are damp with morning dew. Back and forth you go. Each trip is the same. Each movement repeated. Later, you scrub floors, kneeling again, rag in hand, cold water soaking into your sleeves. The smell of stone, damp cloth, and old soap fills the space. Your thoughts begin to wander. You gently pull them back. Distraction is dangerous here, not because someone will shout, but because correction comes quietly. A look, a pause, a reminder. A reminder. If you are fortunate, you are assigned to the scriptorium. The room smells of parchment, ink, and oil lamps. Light filters in through narrow windows. You sit at a wooden desk. It is worn smooth where countless hands have rested. Before you lies a manuscript. Your task is simple. Copy. Letter by letter, line by line. Your hand cramps quickly. Ink stains your fingers and settles into the creases of your skin. Mistakes are not erased easily. You scrape them away with a small knife, thinning the parchment dangerously. Silence fills the room, broken only by the faint scratch of quills. Hours pass without marker. Time does not behave normally here. You are corrected often, rarely harshly, never loudly. Correction here is calm. A word spoken quietly. A task reassigned. A longer period of silence imposed. There is no argument. Obedience is expected immediately. You learn to watch yourself constantly. Your posture, your gaze, your thoughts, even your dreams feel monitored. People become ill. Coughs echo through the dormitory at night. Fevers come and go. Caries geben. But sparingly. There is prayer. Rest when possible. Some novices recover. Others simply stop appearing. Their beds are cleared, their names spoken once more in prayer. Then the routine continues. The rhythm of their lives does not slow. As daylight fades, prayers return. Your body is tired now. Deeply, thoroughly tired. Your hands ache. Your knees remember the stone. Supper is even smaller than breakfast. Bread again, water, sometimes nothing more. The final prayers are slower. Voices lower. By the time you return to the dormitory, exhaustion wraps around you like a blanket. You lie down. The bell will come again. It always does, and as sleep begins to take you, you understand something important. This life is not designed to break you suddenly. It is designed to wear you down gently, until routine feels natural, until silence feels safe, until obedience feels like rest. Imagine being given away. Not dramatically, not with tears or protest, but quietly. You're a child, perhaps 8 years old, perhaps younger. Your parents speak in low voices. The decision has already been made. In medieval Europe, sending a child to a monastery was not always an act of devotion. Sometimes it was practical, sometimes political, sometimes financial. Another mouth not to feed, another soul secured. And so a child like Hildegard is led through heavy doors into a world that will never fully release her. The monastery does not feel cruel, it feels vast. Stone walls rise higher than anything you have known. The air is cooler here, quieter. The adults speak gently, but firmly. Rules are explained without discussion. This is your home now. Childhood inside a monastery does not look like childhood outside. There are no toys, no wandering. Days are structured early. Prayer is learned before play, silence before conversation. You learn to sit still, to listen, to wait. Your body grows, but slowly. Food is simply, portions are modest. Illness visits often. Children cough. Fevers pass through the dormitories. Some children leave, return to families, reassigned elsewhere. Others stay. Hildegard stays. She grows thin, often weak. Her body does not cooperate with the rhythm imposed upon it. She experiences pain, dizziness, moments where the world seems too bright, too loud, too close. There are no doctors, as you would know them, only observation, prayer, endurance. As Hildegard grows older, the routine tightens around her. Prayer fills the day. Work fills what remains. She learns to read slowly, carefully. Books are precious. Words are sacred. She copies text by hand. Her fingers cramp. Ink smudges. Mistakes are corrected. Patiently, relentlessly. The rhythm of their lives presses inward. Sleep is broken by bells. Meals are taken without pleasure. Over time, exhaustion becomes normal, and then something unexpected happens. Hildegard begins to see things, not as dreams, not as imagination, but as impressions that arrive uninvited. Light that seems to have weight, shapes that feel meaningful without explanation. She does not speak of them at first. In a monastery, unusual experiences are dangerous. They can be interpreted as pride, or temptation, or illness of the soul. So she keeps them quiet. Years pass. The visions return again and again. Often during prayer, sometimes during sickness, sometimes during deep fatigue. They do not frighten her, but they trouble her. Eventually, Hildegard becomes a nun. Then, reluctantly, a leader. Not because she seeks power, but because she is obedient, educated, reliable. Leadership in a monastery does not come with celebration. It comes with responsibility. She manages schedules, discipline, resources. She listens to complaints. She corrects mistakes. All the while, her health remains fragile. And the visions persist. She worries constantly that they are sinful, that they come from weakness. Her hesitation becomes its own burden. Only later, much later, does she begin to write. Not boldly, not confidently. She seeks approval first. Superiors examine her words carefully. The church moves slowly. Eventually, permission is granted. She writes what she sees, carefully framing it as something given, not claimed. Her texts are dense, symbolic, filled with circles, fire, light, and balance. She writes about the human body, about plants and healing, about the connection between nature and the soul. She does not shout, say, explains. Hildegard becomes known, not famous in the modern sense, but respected. Letters are exchanged. Questions are asked. Still, she never leaves the monastery system. Her life remains bound by bells, by stone, by routine. Even recognition does not bring comfort. She works while ill, writes while exhausted. Her authority is always conditional. Borrowed Hildegard grows old. Her body weakens further. She does not die dramatically. She fades. Prayers continue. Schedules continue. Her bed is emptied. Her writings remain copied by hands, much like yours. In segment 1, tired, obedient, careful. Hildegard's life was not an escape from monastic hardship. It was proof of it. Even brilliance had to move slowly, quietly. Within permission, her story reminds us that the monastery did not destroy individuality, but it tightly controlled how it could exist. As her name echoes faintly through history, we return our attention to the walls themselves, because beyond individual lives, the monastery was filled with habits and rituals that shaped everyone inside, and some of them remain quietly mysterious, even now. As the monastery settles into its deepest quiet, there comes a point in the night when even routine seems to loosen its grip. The bells have spoken for the last time until morning. Footsteps have faded. Candles burn low, their flames barely moving in the still air. This is when the monastery feels less like a workplace and more like a sealed world, closed off from everything beyond its walls. Living here long enough, You would begin to notice how much of life is shaped, not by dramatic moments, but by repeated actions performed so often they no longer feel chosen. The monks would not describe these actions as strange. To them, they were simply the way things were done. But to an outsider, and sometimes even to a novice lying awake in the dark, these habits could feel mysterious, heavy with meaning that was never fully explained. Silence is the first and most powerful of these rituals. It is not a single rule, but a constant presence. Silence during meals. Silence during work. Silence while walking through the cloister. Silence, even in moments of discomfort or pain. It presses gently against the mind, removing distraction one layer at a time. At first, silence feels empty. Then it begins to fill itself. Without conversation, the smallest sounds grow larger. The soft scrape of a sandal on stone, the slow drip of water somewhere behind the walls, the sound of your own breath, steady and unavoidable. Over time, you begin to hear things you never noticed before. The building speaks quietly, through creaks and echoes and temperature shifts that move through the stone-like breath. The monks believed silence was necessary for listening. Not listening to one another, but listening for something beyond themselves. God, truth, clarity. The words varied, but the intention was the same. Silence was not absence. It was preparation. This kind of silence changes how time feels. Without conversation, without interruption, hours stretch. A single task can seem to take an entire morning. Copying a page of text, pulling weeds from a narrow garden bed, standing in prayer while the body sways slightly from fatigue. The mind adapts slowly. Thoughts wander at first, jumping from memory to memory. Faces from childhood. Warmth, food, laughter. But with repetition, even these thoughts begin to lose their sharpness. They return less often. When they do, they feel distant, like scenes remembered through water. Some monks describe this as peace. Others described it as struggle. Many never described it at all. Sleep, too, was shaped by ritual. It was never allowed to settle fully. The night was divided deliberately. Bells would wake the monks in the darkest hours, pulling them from shallow rest back into prayer. This interruption was not accidental. It was believed that sleep made the soul dull, and waking it repeatedly kept it alert. The body resisted at first. Heavy eyelids, slow movements, muscles stiff with cold. Over time, the body learned. Sleep became lighter, dreams shorter. Nights blurred into a pattern of rising and resting, never quite completing either. In T-state, the boundary between waking and dreaming softened. Some monks reported hearing voices that were not there. Others saw light where there was none. Shapes formed briefly in the corner of the eye and vanished when looked at directly. To modern minds, these experiences might suggest exhaustion, malnutrition, or stress. To the monks themselves, they were interpreted carefully. Some were dismissed as distraction. Others were written down, analyzed, prayed over. Visions were not automatically celebrated. They were treated with suspicion. A vision could be divine, but it could also be dangerous. Pride was considered a greater threat than doubt. And so, when a monk experienced something unusual, he was expected to report it quietly to a superior who would decide whether it mattered at all. The monastery kept records of many things: land holdings, donations, deaths. But inner experiences were rarely preserved unless they were approved, framed, and controlled. Another ritual unfolded in the scriptorium, where writing itself became a slow, almost meditative act. Copying texts was not creative work. It was repetition, precision, patience. Each letter formed carefully, each line spaced evenly. The goal was not expression, but preservation. Mistakes were not dramatic. They were simply a small knife scraped away ink and parchment fibers alike. The page grew thinner, more fragile, but usable. Over time, some pages bore the faint scars of many corrections, layers of effort barely visible unless held to the light. This process mirrored monastic life itself. Errors were expected. Correction was constant. Nothing was discarded unless absolutely necessary. Even decoration when it appeared, followed strict patterns. Illuminated manuscripts glowed softly with gold and color, but their designs were symbolic rather than personal. Circles, vines, repeated shapes, images meant to guide contemplation, not excitement. Color itself carried meaning. Blue for heaven, red for sacrifice, gold for the divine. These were not choices made freely. They were inherited, repeated, and rarely questioned. Outside the scriptorium, other rituals shaped the day. Washing hands before meals, bowing at specific points in the corridor, standing when a senior monk entered the room. These gestures were small, almost invisible, but they reinforced hierarchy constantly. Hierarchy was not announced. It was performed. A novice learned where to stand, where to sit, when to move. Over time, these rules became instinctive. The body responded before the mind had time to consider alternatives. Even death followed ritual. When a monk fell ill beyond recovery, there was no dramatic vigil. Prayers were said. The body was kept clean. Others continued their tasks. Death was treated as a passage, not an interruption. Afterward, the body was wrapped simply, buried quickly. The name recorded, the bed reassigned. Grief existed, but it was quiet. There was no space for lingering sorrow. The rhythm of their lives continued, steady and unbroken. Perhaps the strangest ritual of all was endurance itself. To remain, to stay, to repeat the same actions day after day, year after year, without visible reward. The monastery did not promise comfort. It promised order. Some monks found deep meaning in this structure. Others simply learned to live inside it. At night, lying awake beneath rough blankets, the mind might wander again. Questions surfaced softly. We dies life. Why these rules? Why silence? But the bell would come soon enough. And when it did, questions were folded away, replaced by motion. As candle flames thinned and darkness settled more fully, the monastery seemed to exist outside of ordinary time, a place where centuries could pass without altering the shape of the day, where rituals survived wars, plagues, and changing rulers simply by repeating themselves. And beyond these rituals, beyond silence and sleep and prayer, there was something else quietly present. Power. Not the loud kind, not the visible kind, but the kind that decides which rituals matter, which voices are heard, and which lives remain unseen. And that quiet presence begins to reveal itself more clearly as we continue. Power in the monastery rarely announced itself. It did not raise its voice or demand attention. Instead, it rested quietly within routines, embedded in customs so old they no longer felt constructed. The monks did not often speak of authority directly. They experienced it through permission and denial, through access and absence, through who was allowed to ask questions and who was expected only to listen. The rituals that governed monastic life were designed to appear timeless. They were described as inherited rather than invented. This gave them weight. A rule followed 4 generations felt less like a choice and more like gravity. You did not argue with it. You adapted your posture around it. One of the most quietly influential rituals was confession, not the dramatic public kind, but the private, repetitive act of examining the self under guidance. Confession was expected regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes daily. It was framed as cleansing, a way to maintain spiritual order, but it also trained the mind to monitor itself constantly. You learned to watch your thoughts, to categorize them, to dim, to speak them aloud to someone higher than you in the hierarchy. Over time, this internal surveillance became automatic. Even when no one was listening, you listened to yourself. Even when no correction came, you anticipated it. This shaped identity in subtle ways. You were not simply a person living under rules. You became someone who enforced those rules internally. Desire softened, anger dulled. Curiosity learned to turn inward instead of outward. Another ritual that carried quiet weight was the reading of rule books themselves. The Rule of Saint Benedict, for example, was not merely a guide. It was read aloud repeatedly, sometimes in full, sometimes in parts. Hearing it again and again did not invite debate. It reinforced familiarity. The language of these rules was gentle, even compassionate, but firm. Obedience was described as freedom, humility as strength, submission as peace. These words settled slowly into the mind, reshaping how experience was interpreted. Discomfort was reframed as discipline. Hunger became purification. Fatigue became devotion. This reframing did not eliminate suffering, but it gave it meaning. Meaning made endurance possible. The physical environment reinforced these ideas. The architecture of monasteries was not accidental. Cloisters were enclosed, encouraging inward movement. Windows were narrow, limiting distraction. Decoration was minimal. Even beauty was controlled, introduced sparingly so it would not overwhelm. Gardens were common, but they were functional as well as calming. Herbs for medicine, vegetables for sustenance, orderly rows, trimmed paths. Nature itself was shaped into obedience. Sound followed similar rules. Bells marked time. Chant shaped speech. Silence filled what remained. Music existed, but only within strict forms. No improvisation, no personal expression. Over years, these patterns rewired how the senses responded to the world. Loudness became unsettling. Choice became exhausting. Freedom, as understood outside the walls, felt unfamiliar and even threatening. Some monks who left monasteries later in life described feeling overwhelmed by ordinary environments. Markets felt chaotic. Conversations felt intrusive. Time felt unstructured to the point of anxiety. Within the monastery, everything had its place. Even mystery had boundaries. Unexplained events were allowed, but only within approved frameworks. A vision could be divine if interpreted correctly. A dream could be meaningful if filtered through doctrine. An unusual feeling could be a test rather than a question. Anything that threatened the structure itself was quietly contained. This containment extended to knowledge. Libraries existed, but access was limited. Certain texts were restricted. Curiosity was guided rather than encouraged freely. Learning was acceptable when it served devotion. Speculation for its own sake was discouraged. Knowledge was not forbidden. It was curated. One of the more curious rituals involved timekeeping itself. Before mechanical clocks became common, monasteries relied on bells, sundials, and observation. Time was approximate, shaped by light and season, yet it was treated as precise. This paradox mattered. It taught monks to trust the system rather than their senses. If the bell rang, it was time, regardless of how it felt. If prayer was scheduled, it occurred, regardless of exhaustion. Personal perception became secondary. Over long periods, this produced a particular kind of calm. Not happiness, not excitement, but stability. The world narrowed. Complexity reduced. Life became a series of known motions. For some, this was deeply comforting. For others, it was quietly suffocating. Records from monasteries include occasional references to restlessness, doubt, and despair. These were not dramatized. They were noted briefly, often framed as spiritual struggle rather than emotional distress. A monk might be described as troubled in spirit or given to melancholy. Remedies included prayer, labor, and increased supervision. The solution was rarely change. It was reinforcement. Rituals also governed how monks related to the outside world. Contact was limited. Letters were monitored. Visits were controlled. News arrived slowly, filtered through authority. Wars happened beyond the walls. Plagues passed through regions. Kings rose and fell. Inside, the daily schedule remained mostly unchanged. This insulation created a sense of timelessness. A novice entering the monastery could feel as though he had stepped into a place where centuries overlapped. The same prayers spoken by those long gone were spoken again, unchanged. Objects reinforced this continuity. Wooden benches worn smooth by generations. Stone steps hollowed slightly by countless feet. Books copied again and again, preserving not just words, but handwriting styles, errors, and corrections. The monastery was a living archive of repetition. Even clothing followed ritual. Habits were plain. Uniform, they erased individuality intentionally. You were not meant to stand out. You were meant to blend. Mirrors were rare. Self-image mattered little. Identity was communal. And yet, within this sameness, small differences persisted. A monk's pace, his handwriting, the way he bowed his head during prayer, these variations were tolerated as long as they did not disrupt the whole. This balance between uniformity and individuality was delicate. Rituals maintained it quietly. As years passed, novices became monks. Monks aged. New novices arrived. The cycle continued. Some rituals faded over time, others intensified. Reforms swept through monastic orders periodically, tightening rules that had grown lax. Fasting became stricter, silence extended. Comfort reduced. Reform was framed not as punishment, but as return, a return to purity. 2. Origins. This constant return to an idealized past kept monasteries oriented backward. Innovation was rare. Preservation was prized. And so, the mystery of monastic ritual was not that it was secret or magical. It was that it worked. It shaped human behavior over generations, without force, without spectacle. It turned time into structure, discomfort into meaning, repetition into identity. As you lie quietly, listening, it may feel difficult to imagine enduring such a life, and yet, thousands did. Millions, across centuries, accepted these rituals not as burdens, but as the shape of reality itself. And while the novices rose before dawn and worked until exhaustion, while they slept lightly and spoke little, another life unfolded alongside theirs, one shaped by the same walls, the same prayers, the same rituals, but experienced very differently. And it is toward that contrast that the story will eventually drift when the time is right. For now, the monastery remains still. The rituals continue, unseen, unbroken, and the night holds its silence, gently. As the hours stretch on inside the monastery, the rituals no longer feel like actions you perform. They begin to feel like the air itself, something you move through without noticing, something that surrounds you even when you are not thinking about it. This is how ritual becomes invisible. It does not demand attention. It shapes behavior quietly, persistently, until it feels natural. One of the most subtle rituals is how emotion is handled. Joy is not forbidden, but it is restrained. Sorrow is acknowledged, but not indulged. Anger is examined, then folded inward. The goal is not to erase feeling, but to flatten it, smoothing its sharpest edges so it does not disturb the order of the day. When something good happens, it is received calmly. Gratitude replaces excitement. When something painful occurs, it is accepted with composure. Patience replaces protest. Over time, this emotional posture becomes habitual. The face learns neutrality. The voice learns steadiness. This emotional discipline is not taught through lectures. It is learned through observation. You watch older monks respond to discomfort without visible reaction. You notice how praise is deflected, how suffering is endured quietly. You imitate without being told. Ritual also governs how the body is experienced. The body is not celebrated. It is managed. Hunger, fatigue, and discomfort are treated as conditions to be acknowledged, not solved. The body becomes something you carry, rather than something you inhabit fully. Fasting intensifies this relationship. On fasting days, meals shrink further. Hunger sharpens, then dulls. After a while, it becomes a steady presence, neither urgent nor alarming. The mind adapts. Focus narrows. Sensations simplify. Some monks describe fasting as clarifying. Others simply endured it. Both responses were acceptable, as long as the fast was kept. Sleep deprivation functioned similarly. Waking in the night for prayer disrupted natural rhythms. Over time, the body adjusted. Sleep became lighter. Dreams became fragmented. The line between rest and wakefulness blurred. In these states, imagination could become vivid. Colors brighter. Thoughts more fluid. Some monks experienced moments of insight during these periods, ideas that felt profound, connections that felt meaningful. Others experienced confusion, disorientation, or melancholy. All of this was absorbed into the framework of ritual. Nothing was interpreted in isolation. Experiences were given meaning only through accepted explanations. Another ritual that shaped monastic life was the ritual of waiting. Waiting for the bell. Waiting for permission. Waiting for instruction. Waiting for the next prayer. The next meal. The next season. Waiting trained patience. It also reduced agency. You did not decide what happened next. You responded. This pattern extended into choices were limited. Obedience was praised. Initiative was permitted only within narrow bounds. Over time, the desire to choose weakened. This did not mean monks lacked intelligence or awareness. Many were highly educated, but their knowledge existed within a structure that valued stability over exploration. Curiosity was guided carefully. Questions were allowed if they led toward understanding scripture, doctrine, or tradition. Questions that wandered too far were gently redirected. Mystery was permitted, but only certain kinds of mystery. The mystery of divine intention. The mystery of faith. The mystery of existence itself. Mysteries that challenged authority, hierarchy, or ritual were not encouraged. Artifacts found within monasteries sometimes hint at this tension. Marginal notes in manuscripts, small variations in copied texts, slight deviations in illumination styles. These were subtle signs of individuality pressing gently against uniformity. Most of the time, they went unnoticed. Archaeological remains also reveal the material side of ritual. Repetitive wear patterns on floors, grooves worn into stone by pacing during prayer, shallow depressions where knees touched the ground over centuries. These marks were not intentional. They accumulated slowly, quietly. Physical evidence of devotion measured not in moments, but in lifetimes. Even the act of entering and leaving spaces followed ritual. Doors were crossed with pauses, thresholds acknowledged. Movement was deliberate. The monastery was designed to slow you down, to make every transition noticeable, to prevent rushing. This slowness extended to communication with the outside world. News arrived late. Events were often already resolved by the time monks heard of them. This created a sense of distance from ordinary history. Time inside the monastery moved differently. Years passed, but they felt uniform. Memory blurred. Individual events mattered less than continuity. For novices, this could be unsettling. For older monks, it could be reassuring. The world outside changed unpredictably. Inside, the rhythm remained. Some monks left, not many, but some. Records mentioned departures quietly. A name crossed out. A note added, rarely an explanation. Leaving was not framed as failure, but it was not celebrated either. Those who left stepped back into a world that had continued without them. For those who stayed, ritual became identity. This is perhaps the deepest mystery of monastic life, how repetition, silence, and structure could reshape a person so thoroughly that the absence of these things later felt like loss. The monastery did not trap people physically. Most could leave. What it did was change what felt normal, safe, and meaningful. And as these rituals repeated day after day, year after year, they created a system that required very little enforcement. The structure maintained itself. At the center of this system were people who understood it deeply, people who benefited from it, people who shaped it intentionally, and slowly, almost the difference between those who lived at the bottom of the hierarchy and those at the top became more visible, not through loud displays of power, but through access, through comfort, through choice. And that difference, quiet but persistent, is where the story will finally turn next. As the monastery breathes through another night, the rituals continue without pause, without announcement. They do not need attention to survive. They persist because everyone inside them has learned how to carry them forward, often without conscious thought. This is how a system becomes not through force, but through familiarity. The longer one remains within these walls, the more the rituals begin to feel inevitable. They are no longer perceived as rules imposed from above, but as the natural order of things. This transformation happens slowly, so slowly that it often goes unnoticed. until it is complete. Even memory itself is reshaped by ritual. Individual days blur together. Seasons pass with subtle changes. A little more light at morning prayers, a little more cold seeping through the stone at night, but the structure remains intact. Personal milestones lose importance. Birthdays are rarely marked. Anniversaries fade. What matters is continuity. A monk's sense of self becomes tied not to unique experiences, but to participation, to being present, to maintaining the rhythm. This is especially true for novices, whose identities are still forming. Entering the monastery young meant growing into its shape. Habits learned early settled deeply. Silence felt normal. Obedience felt expected. Choice felt unnecessary. Over time, even desire changed. Wanting less became a skill. The absence of options reduced longing. When nothing is offered, nothing is missed. This was not always conscious. It emerged gradually through repetition and reinforcement. The body learned what to expect. The mind learned what to avoid. Fear, too, softened. Fear of the unknown was replaced by certainty. Fear of failure was replaced by acceptance. The worst that could happen inside the monastery was already known. Hunger, fatigue, correction. These were familiar. The outside world, by contrast, became abstract, a place of noise, unpredictability, temptation. For some monks, the idea of leaving felt more frightening than staying. Ritual played a role here as well. The monastery framed itself as refuge, not from physical danger alone, but from disorder, from confusion, from excess. This framing was reinforced through stories, sermons, and readings. Tales of chaos beyond the walls, of moral decay, of violence and instability. Whether these tales were exaggerated mattered less than their effect. Inside was calm. Outside was not. The mystery, then, is not why rituals existed, but why they worked so well. They worked because they reduced choice, because they replaced uncertainty with structure, because they transformed time into something predictable. They also worked because they were upheld by authority that was rarely questioned, the authority of tradition, the authority of hierarchy, the authority of interpretation. Who decided which rituals mattered most? Who determined how strictly they were enforced? Who interpreted unusual experiences and declared them acceptable or dangerous? These questions rarely surfaced openly, but their answers shaped daily life profoundly. Novices followed rituals. Senior monks interpreted them. Abbots enforced them. Bishops oversaw them. At 8th level, power increased slightly. Privilege followed quietly. This did not invalidate the rituals themselves. Many monks genuinely believed in their purpose. Many found meaning, peace, and identity within them. But belief did not erase imbalance. Some monks lived the same rituals with fewer hardships. Better food, warmer rooms, more flexibility, more voice. The rituals remained the same in name, but their experience differed. This contrast was rarely spoken of directly. Doing so would disrupt harmony. Instead, it was absorbed quietly, like everything else. Over centuries, monasteries adapted, rituals shifted slightly. Schedules adjusted, reforms tightened or loosened rules, but the core remained intact. Even today, echoes of these rituals survive in structured schedules, in repetitive practices, in the idea that discipline leads to clarity. Modern life often lacks such structure, and many feel its absence keenly. Yet, imagining oneself fully inside this world reveals its cost. Ritual provided order, but at the expense of freedom. It offered certainty, but limited expression. It promised meaning, but demanded endurance. As the night deepens once more, the monastery stands unchanged. Stone walls hold their silence. Bells wait for their moment. The rituals continue, whether observed or not. And with that quiet continuation, this long exploration of mystery and habit gently comes to rest. Soon, attention will shift to those who lived alongside these rituals differently. Those who benefited from them. those who guided them. But for now, let the silence settle. The monastery breathes. The night holds, and the rhythm carries on, while the novices slept lightly on narrow beds, wrapped in wool that never fully held warmth. Other rooms within the same walls rested very differently. These rooms were not hidden exactly, but they were distant, separated by corridors novices rarely walked, and doors they were not meant to open. The monastery spoke often of humility, but humility did not erase hierarchy. It simply softened its appearance. The abbot's chambers were quieter, warmer, and more private. Stone walls still surrounded them, but they were thicker here, holding heat more effectively. A fireplace might be lit on colder nights, a heavier door kept drafts away. A single bed rather than a row of them allowed for uninterrupted rest. This was not luxury in the modern sense, but compared to the novice dormitory, it was comfort. The abbot rose later, not because he was less devoted, but because his responsibilities were different. His prayers were often private, shorter, shaped around meetings and correspondence. Where novices followed the bell without question, the abbot decided when the bell would ring. Meals, too, followed a different rhythm. The rule was observed, but interpreted generously. Fish appeared more often. Bread was fresher, wine was poured with less restraint. Meals might be taken with guests, local nobles, clergy, messengers from distant places. Conversation was allowed. Laughter, even, was not unheard of. Outside the monastery, abbots were not merely spiritual leaders. They were landholders, administrators, political figures. The monastery owned fields worked by peasants. It collected rents. It negotiated boundaries. It stored grain. It employed labor. While novices carried buckets and scrubbed floors, abbots managed resources. Their work was not physical, but it shaped lives just as surely. Letters arrived regularly. Seals were broken. Decisions were made. A novice might live his entire life without leaving the monastery grounds. An abbot traveled. He rode horseback. He stayed in guest houses. He met bishops and lords as an equal, sometimes as a superior. Hierarchy extended upward beyond the abbey walls. Within the monastery, senior monks occupied a middle space. They lived closer to the novices than the abbot, but not among them. Their duties granted them small privileges, better seating, lighter labor, greater voice. They supervised work, corrected behavior, interpreted rules. Obedience flowed downward. Authority flowed upward. This structure was rarely questioned because it was framed as natural. Necessary? Divinely ordered. The same prayers were spoken by all, but not from the same position. The same rituals governed daily life, but they did not weigh equally on everybody. A novice's exhaustion was expected. A senior monk's fatigue was accommodated. An abbot's health was protected. This difference was subtle, but constant. Even illness revealed the contrast. A sick novice rested only briefly before returning to duty. A sick abbot was tended carefully. Herbs were prepared. Warmth provided. Rest encouraged. This was not cruelty. It was prioritization. The monastery's survival depended on leadership, and leadership required preservation, so comfort followed authority quietly. The abbey church itself reflected this structure. Seating was arranged by rank. Processions placed bodies in precise order. Position mattered. Novices stood at the edges, senior monks closer to the center. The abbot nearest the altar. Distance from the sacred mirrored distance from power. Even silence worked differently at the top. Abbots spoke often. They gave instructions. They negotiated. Silence was something they could choose. For novices, silence was mandatory. Over time, this contrast shaped perception. Novices learned to see authority as calm, composed, elevated. Power looked effortless from below. What was less visible was the cost of authority, the pressure of decisions, the burden of responsibility. But these costs were experienced privately, softened by comfort and choice. Choice itself was the great divider. Novices had almost none. Abbeys were filled with men who spoke often about renunciation, but some renunciations were easier than others. And still, the system functioned, because everyone accepted their place. As the night deepens again, and the monastery settles into its layered, quiet dormitories cold, chambers warm, corridors empty, the contrast remains steady and unspoken. And it is within this quiet inequality that monastic life endured for centuries, convincing all within it that this, too, was part of the order of things. Beyond the private chambers and warmed hearths, the abbot's authority extended outward, far past the monastery walls, into fields and villages that many novices would never see. The monastery was not only a place of prayer, it was an institution woven into the economy and politics of the region. From the perspective of a novice, the outside world felt distant and abstract, reduced to prayers and cautionary tales. But for those at the top, it was immediate and tangible. Tenants depended on the monastery's land, local leaders relied on its stability. Disputes were brought to its gates. The abbot acted as judge as often as spiritual guide. He mediated conflicts. He enforced agreements. He decided how much grain could be stored and how much would be given away in lean years. These decisions carried weight. A misjudgment could lead to hunger beyond the walls. A generous choice could secure loyalty for generations. Power was exercised quietly, often through letters rather than commands. Wax seals, careful wording, measured tone. Authority expressed itself in calm language. Inside the monastery, this power translated into insulation. When famine struck the region, novices might feel their portions shrink slightly, but the monastery as a whole rarely starved. Storehouses were filled during good years. Reserves protected the institution. Hierarchy ensured survival. Guests arrived regularly. Nobles seeking counsel, clergy passing through, royal envoys carrying requests or demands. These guests did not sleep in the novice dormitory. They stayed in the guest house, a space that mirrored elite comfort. Clean bedding, better food, warmer rooms. The monastery knew how to host. Novices might glimpse these guests only briefly. A procession passing through, unfamiliar fabrics, polished boots. The world beyond the walls appeared richer, louder, more textured in those moments. And then it disappeared again. Senior monks acted as intermediaries. They served at table. They translated concerns. They learned the language of diplomacy. This training created another quiet division. Those close to power developed skills novices did not. Reading complex documents, negotiating terms, interpreting law. Knowledge itself became a form of privilege. Access to books followed the same pattern. While all monks were technically allowed to read, not all reading mattered equally. Novices practiced basic texts. Senior monks studied theology, law, administration. The abbot's library contained volumes few others touched. Books meant influence. They shaped policy. They justified decisions. They reinforced authority. Education elevated status, subtly but permanently. Time, too, belonged differently to the elite. While novices followed the bell relentlessly, senior monks had flexibility. Meetings replaced manual labor. Travel replaced routine. This freedom from physical exhaustion changed posture, movement, even speech. Authority moved slower, spoke less urgently, appeared composed. To a novice, this composure seemed spiritual. In truth, it was partly structural. The monastery's hierarchy mirrored the world outside more than it admitted. Rank existed everywhere. Wealth accumulated. Power centralized. Yet the monastery framed itself as separate, pure, detached. This contradiction was rarely addressed openly. Instead, it was absorbed into daily practice. The rule was interpreted in ways that protected leadership. Hardship was framed as humility for some, stewardship for others. The language remained the same. The experience differed. Even discipline revealed contrast. A novice who broke silence faced correction immediately. A senior monk might be counseled privately. An abbot rarely faced visible discipline at all. Authority disciplined downward. This imbalance did not necessarily breed resentment. Many novices accepted it as divine order. Others never considered alternatives. For those who did, silence offered no outlet. Over time, Ambition was reached. Few novices aspired to authority openly. Desire itself was suspect. Advancement came slowly, often through obedience rather than talent. Those who rose did so quietly, almost reluctantly. The monastery preserved itself by discouraging disruption. As years passed, some novices became senior monks. Some senior monks became abbots. When they did, their perspective shifted. The cold they once endured was remembered dimly. The warmth felt deserved. Responsibility reframed memory. The system sustained itself through transformation. As another night settles over the monastery, the contrast remains gentle but firm. Rooms hold different temperatures. Voices carry different weight. Choices are distributed unevenly. Yet all prayers rise together, and in that shared sound, the divisions soften just enough to remain invisible. The rhythm of the monastery continues through the long night. In the dormitories, novices stir occasionally, rolling beneath thin blankets, adjusting to drafts that slip through the rough stone. In the abbot's chambers, the air is still and warmer, the hearth glowing faintly, casting gentle shadows on the walls. The contrast is subtle but persistent. It is felt rather than announced. It is the quiet assurance that authority brings, the kind of difference you learn to perceive without words. Power here does not announce itself with banners or speeches. It manifests in small allowances. Extra food, longer sleep, a private chamber, access to books, choice of work, permission to speak when others must remain silent. These allowances are not frivolous. They are the soft scaffolding that upholds the hierarchy, allowing authority to remain composed, steady, and seemingly effortless. The abbot's day begins differently, even before the first bell calls others from sleep. While novices awaken abruptly, rubbing their eyes against the chill and swallowing stale bread with thin broth, the abbot wakes slowly. He may spend a few moments in reflection, listening to the faint crackle of embers in the hearth, tracing the familiar rhythm of the monastery in silence. His body is not exhausted from labor. His mind, though occupied, moves more freely, weighing decisions, planning tasks, and anticipating the needs of both the monastery and the surrounding lands. Outside the monastery, fields stretch across the valley, tilled by tenants who owe their labor or rent to this institution. The abbot's influence extends quietly, but unmistakably, over these lands. He decides allocations of grain, authorizes repair of bridges, and communicates with local lords on matters of both faith and civic order. This authority is never loud, never dramatized, yet it is constant and pervasive. Every novice who sweeps the floors or scrubs the kitchens participates indirectly in sustaining the system that empowers the abbot. Meals reflect this hierarchy as well. Where a novice receives thin broth and coarse bread, the abbot enjoys a slightly wider variety: soft bread, fresh vegetables, occasionally a small portion of meat or fish. Wine is permitted in moderation, poured carefully into simple goblets. Guests may be served alongside him, bringing news from nearby towns, distant abbeys, and even noble courts. Conversation flows naturally here, gently probing topics that would be off-limits to the novices, yet always bounded by decorum and ritual. Even prayer is experienced differently. The abbot stands near the altar, closer to the sacred light, filtering through narrow stained glass. Novices occupy the peripheral positions, their postures dictated by centuries of practice. The abbot's proximity confers a subtle sense of authority. His presence a quiet reminder that the hierarchy extends into the spiritual as well as the practical. The scriptorium offers another layer of contrast. While novices copy texts slowly and carefully, learning letters, punctuation, and spacing, senior monks and the abbot access more advanced minds. They read complex theological arguments, historical records, legal documents, and scientific observations preserved over generations. The ability to interpret these texts, to act upon their knowledge, grants influence. Reading itself becomes a form of power, a means of shaping understanding and decision-making both within and beyond the monastery walls. Even labor is experienced differently. Novices carry water, scrub floors, and mend robes. Senior monks supervise, instruct, and coordinate. The abbot oversees all, rarely lifting heavy objects, instead orchestrating the rhythm of work, through planning, observation, and occasional gentle correction. This division is subtle, almost invisible in daily life, yet it determines the lived experience of each monk, shaping fatigue, opportunity, and perception of time. The monastery's architecture enforces these distinctions further. Narrow corridors lead from dormitories to workspaces. Larger, more comfortable halls accommodate senior monks and guests. Private rooms offer warmth and quiet for those at the top, while novices inhabit shared spaces exposed to drafts and the collective sound of sleeping bodies. Windows in elite chambers are positioned to catch morning light more fully, creating a gentle but noticeable difference in comfort and experience. Even the acoustics vary. The abbot's chambers allow speech to carry softly, while dormitories amplify every whisper, cough, and scrape. Hierarchy also governs interaction with the outside world. Abbots and senior monks correspond with bishops, local rulers, and neighboring monasteries, exchanging letters sealed with wax and carefully worded instructions. Novices rarely witness these interactions. Their world is inward-facing, contained, and insulated from politics. They experience power only as guidance, correction, and routine. For them, authority is felt more than understood. For the abbot, authority is exercised and interpreted, shaping both lives and institutions. Yet the contrast is not solely material or procedural. It extends into perception, patience, and expectation. Novices endure fatigue, hunger, and repetition as part of formation. Senior monks endure responsibility, scrutiny, and judgment as part of leadership. The abbot bears the weight of administration, the expectation of wisdom, and the responsibility for survival of both the monastery and its surrounding lands. Each experiences limitation differently, shaped by both position and ritual. Even moments of illness reflect this hierarchy. A sick novice is tended minimally. He rests briefly before returning to assigned labor. A senior monk receives more attentive care. The abbot, when ill, is observed carefully, treated with herbal remedies, and often permitted rest until full recovery. Privilege ensures both survival and the ability to continue functioning effectively. Despite these contrasts, the monastery maintains an overarching sense of unity. All members follow the same liturgical calendar, observe the same major feasts, and participate in common prayers. Daily rhythms rising, eating, laboring, praying persist throughout the hierarchy. Differences exist, but they are harmonized into a single, coherent system. The novice perceives continuity and order. The abbot perceives influence and responsibility. Both are shaped, constrained, and defined by ritual, yet in profoundly different ways. The quiet discipline of the monastery shapes identity. For novices, it teaches endurance, obedience, and patience. For senior monks, it trains leadership, interpretation, and mediation. For the abbot, it cultivates stewardship, vision, and measured authority. Rituals serve all, yet impact each differently, creating layers of experience that coexist without open acknowledgement. Differences in comfort, control, and choice are subtle but persistent, reinforcing hierarchy without visible disruption. Even silence has hierarchy. A novice must not speak without permission. A senior monk speaks selectively. The abbot's voice is constant, measured, and decisive. Silence and speech are allocated differently, shaping presence, perception, and authority. Through these contrasts, the monastery persists. It is a self-regulating organism, with each member performing a role that ensures continuity. Novices carry the labor of the many. Senior monks manage systems and enforced order. The abbot directs, interprets, and preserves. Ritual, hierarchy, and privilege operate together, silently sustaining centuries of monastic life. And as dawn approaches, light filters softly into every chamber. Dormitories are still dim and cold. Private rooms glow faintly with the warmth of fire. The day begins anew. Bells will ring. Prayers will rise. Labor will continue. The hierarchy will reassert itself, silently but undeniably. And the monastery, through ritual, repetition, and difference, will continue to endure, unchanged and unhurried, holding the weight of both the ordinary and the exceptional. The monastery awakens slowly, to the soft light of morning, filtered through narrow windows, casting muted patterns across the stone floors. In the dormitories, novices begin to stir, stretching stiff limbs beneath coarse blankets, moving quietly so as not to disturb neighbors. Outside, the air carries the chill of night, slowly receding, brushing against faces and hands as the first laborers take up their tools. In contrast, the abbot's chambers are warmer, brighter, calmer. The fire flickers gently in the hearth, filling the room with heat and soft, golden light. The bed is a single piece, broader and more comfortable than the rows where novices sleep, and the linens are thick, carefully maintained. A pitcher of warm water rests nearby. Breakfast is simple, but prepared with care. Bread slightly fresher than the common ration, a modest portion of cheese, and sometimes a small serving of fish or eggs. Here, nourishment is deliberate, controlled, and intended to maintain the abbot's energy and focus rather than merely sustain life. The rituals of the day unfold differently for each level of hierarchy. Novices rise to the bell, folding their bodies into routines of prayer, labor, and study with precise obedience. Every action is prescribed, every step measured, every hour accounted for. Senior monks, while bound by the same schedule, navigate it with more discretion. They may decide how long to spend on specific tasks, when to assist a novice, or when to attend to correspondence. The abbot moves within this structure almost freely, bending the rhythm of the day to suit responsibilities, consultations, and his own contemplative practices. The bell rings, but its significance is felt differently depending on where one stands in the hierarchy. Labor, too, reflects this layered structure. Novices carry water from the well, scrub floors, repair robes, and tend gardens with careful repetition. Every movement is framed as practice, a lesson in discipline, a shaping of body and mind. Senior monks supervise, teaching, correcting, and observing, balancing work with oversight. The abbot, while rarely engaging in the most strenuous labor, ensures the systems function smoothly. He checks stores of grain, reviews accounts, directs correspondence with bishops and local officials, and settles disputes among tenants and laborers. His labor is subtle, intellectual, and administrative, yet no less critical to the monastery's survival. Meals are a further expression of hierarchy. The novices sit in the long refectory, utensils and bowls simple, portions modest. Conversation is minimal. Senior monks sit at smaller tables, often in private corners, observing order, discussing theological matters, or preparing for tasks. The abbot dines separately when possible, often hosting guests. Wine may be served, bread freshly baked, vegetables carefully prepared. Discussion is permitted here. Advice given, decisions made. The contrast in nourishment, environment, and freedom of speech is gentle but continuous, a quiet reinforcement of authority. Even prayer reflects the stratification. Novices stand at the edges of the cloister, following chants with careful obedience. Senior monks are closer to the altar, their postures precise, their attention trained. The abbot stands near the center, leading, interpreting, or simply observing, embodying authority both spiritual and practical. Proximity, position, and movement all signal status without any overt announcement. The same prayers are spoken by all, yet the experience varies profoundly. The access to knowledge further defines hierarchy. Novices learn letters, basic readings, and routine copywork. Senior monks handle theological texts, law, and detailed records. The abbot commands a library of rare manuscripts and correspondence, interpreting them to guide decisions affecting the monastery, tenants, and even local politics. Knowledge is power in a subtle form. A novice may not fully comprehend these documents, yet their existence shapes the rhythm of the day, the allocation of tasks, and the monastery's decisions. This distribution of labor, comfort, and responsibility reinforces identity and expectation. Novices learn endurance and humility. Senior monks learn stewardship and oversight. The abbot learns judgment and foresight. Each role has its own pressures, limitations, and none are free from ritual or obligation, but each experiences them differently. Even silence manifests unequally. Novices obey strict rules about speaking, rarely interjecting without permission. Senior monks speak selectively, their words carrying measured influence. The abbot's voice is decisive, shaping not only the day but the culture of the monastery itself. Silence is a tool and a discipline, allocated according to role and authority, teaching restraint, focus, and respect. This careful orchestration extends to interaction with the outside world. Novices see it only through letters read aloud, visitors glimpsed in the courtyard, or instructions relayed by senior monks. Senior monks may correspond occasionally, negotiating with external authorities under guidance. The abbot engages fully, mediating disputes, advising rulers, and representing the monastery's interests. He wields influence subtly but profoundly, while novices experience life almost entirely within the rhythm of their internal world. Over decades, the contrast becomes ingrained. Novices adjust to labor and routine. Senior monks adjust to oversight and teaching. Abbots adjust to decision-making and responsibility. Comfort, freedom, and access are distributed along these lines, creating an invisible but ever-present structure. Even after leaving the monastery, former monks may recall these differences: the warmth of certain rooms, the ease of certain roles, and the weight of others. These memories shape perception, habit, and understanding long after the walls have faded from view. Yet, despite the disparity, all participate in a shared rhythm. Bells, prayers, chants, labor, study, and meals continue day after day, unbroken. The hierarchy exists, but it is harmonized within the common structure of monastic life. Discipline and ritual connect the dormitories to the abbot's chambers, the kitchens to the library, and novices to senior monks. Differences are present, but softened, authority embedded seamlessly in the daily flow. The elite contrast is not designed to alienate. It functions quietly, like a current beneath the surface, supporting the survival, stability, and spiritual mission of the monastery. Privilege exists, but it is subtle, tempered by responsibility, ritual, and the awareness that even authority is bounded by the rules, the bells, and the prayers that structure every day. As the morning progresses, novices carry out tasks with precise repetition, senior monks supervise with measured attention, and the abbot oversees the day with calm authority. The contrast is continuous, enduring, and unspoken, yet it shapes every perception, every movement, every moment of monastic life. The monastery, through hierarchy and ritual, continues to sustain itself, generation after generation, quietly and deliberately, holding both the ordinary and the exceptional within its walls. And within this quiet structure, the rhythm of lives unfolds, soft, steady, and guiding each member toward their own experience of discipline, meaning, and endurance. As the day unfolds, the monastery hums with quiet order. Novices carry out tasks with precision, sweeping floors, tending gardens, scrubbing vessels, and moving water from the well. Every action is measured, deliberate, and framed by the rhythm of bells and prayers. Fatigue settles into the limbs slowly, a familiar companion rather than a burden. Each motion trains patience, endurance, and presence, preparing the mind to move in harmony with ritual and expectation. Senior monks move among them, overseeing, instructing, and guiding. Their own movements slower, more deliberate. They correct without harshness, suggest without insistence. They observe the novices, noting mistakes, acknowledging improvements, and gently shaping behavior. In subtle ways, they carry the weight of authority while still living within the same rhythm, their experience shaped by insight and responsibility rather than labor alone. Their position grants comfort and influence, yet imposes its own set of expectations to preserve order, to interpret the rules, and to prepare the novices for a lifetime of practice. The abbot inhabits the highest tier, moving through the monastery with quiet decisiveness. His day is structured but flexible, allowing for oversight of both spiritual and temporal affairs. He meets with senior monks, reviews correspondence, manages resources, and occasionally interacts with outsiders. His comfort is assured. Warmth, privacy, sustenance, and rest are all allocated thoughtfully, a reflection of both rank and the responsibility he bears. Authority is exercised subtly, in ways almost invisible to those below. Yet its presence is palpable, guiding the monastery's rhythm and maintaining its stability. The contrast between these roles is persistent, yet seamless. Each layer of hierarchy exists not as spectacle, but as a quietly reinforcing system. Novices experience repetition, labor, and restraint. Senior monks experience oversight, guidance, and moderate freedom. The abbot experiences decision, influence, and responsibility. Ritual, privilege, and duty flow through all layers, shaping perception, habit, and identity. Even the smallest details reflect this division. Sleeping arrangements, food portions, proximity to warmth, access to books, freedom of speech, and opportunities to interact with the outside world all vary by rank. Silence carries different weight. Obedience has different meaning, and choice is distributed unevenly. Yet the shared structure ensures cohesion, harmony, and continuity. Monastic life endures because of these layers, because of the careful orchestration of comfort, labor, ritual, and privilege. The novices learn patience and endurance. The senior monks learn leadership and discernment. The abbot learns stewardship and foresight. Each role has challenges, limitations, and responsibilities. But each is embedded within a system that balances control, ritual, and hierarchy with continuity and purpose. The day draws to a close, and the monastery gradually shifts toward evening. Bells ring softly, calling monks to prayer. Tasks wind down. Meals are taken with measured quiet. Light fades through the windows, casting gentle shadows on stone floors and wooden furniture. The novices return to their dormitories, stiff but familiar with the day's motions. Senior monks retire to private cells or the library, reflecting on work completed and tasks remaining. The abbot moves quietly through his chambers, overseeing last details, reviewing plans, and listening to the faint sounds of movement before the silence deepens. In this layered, quiet world, hierarchy, ritual, and comfort coexist naturally. Privilege is subtle, responsibility ever-present, and authority continuous but gentle. The monastery survives through the interplay of these forces, through repetition, structure, and endurance. Every body, every mind, every action contributes to a rhythm that has persisted for centuries. And as night falls, once again, the dormitories are dark and still. The private chambers glow faintly with embers. Bells lie silent, yet their influence lingers. The air carries the weight of centuries, of rituals repeated, of lives shaped by discipline, labor, and privilege. The monastery rests, yet it is never truly idle. Its rhythm continues, unseen but enduring. In Tisciot, the contrast is fully realized. The laboring novices, the guiding senior monks, and the observing, directing abbot. Lives intertwined, yet experienced differently, each fulfilling its place within the larger structure. The system endures because it balances hardship and privilege, repetition and discretion, labor and oversight. And within this balance, peace quietly settles, softening the edges of toil, responsibility, and authority. The monastery, in its enduring rhythm, offers a lesson in structure, continuity, and the gentle persistence of order. It teaches that hierarchy can coexist with ritual, that labor can coexist with comfort, and that even the smallest, most repetitive actions contribute to a larger, steady rhythm that spans generations. And now, as you rest alongside this story, the bells are quiet, the hearths fade, and the monastery breathes softly in the night. Let your thoughts follow the rhythm of the day, the slow unfolding of tasks and duties, the quiet endurance of countless lives, until you drift peacefully, carried by the calm repetition and gentle order of centuries past.